So welcome to the Spring Colloquium Dinner. Obviously, wonderful tradition that we have here at Cal State San Marcos, and we're just so excited to have some special guests with us tonight, and as always, to have new faculty in the room, and it's just a really special event. So I'm glad you're all here for this. Oh, I didn't even realize it was on. So first, I would like to welcome, obviously, Sharon Hamill, our speaker for tonight, as well as her special guest, her husband, Sean, and yay! And then I'd also like to welcome our provost, Graham Oberum, who I have to add is the biggest supporter of faculty and faculty development. We are really fortunate to have him. And I'm not just saying that because he's the provost. And then also our Dean of IITS, Kevin Morningstar, is here tonight. And he was very happy with the ice cream sundaes. Don Formo, Dean of Undergraduate Studies. Yay. And our Associate Dean of CHOPS, Kristen Bates. And then a very special guest of the Faculty Center tonight is Michelle Hunt, our AVP for Faculty Affairs, and she's a good friend of Sharon's and just a really great partner with the Faculty Center. And so since this is my last official Faculty Center event for now, who knows, in the future, maybe 10 years I'll be back. I just really wanted her to be here because she's been a great partner to the Faculty Center and is just such a faculty advocate as well. So thank you for being here. And then any brand new faculty? I know, I have my site colleagues. We have, yeah, wave. We have new colleagues in the room. And then, of course, I have to thank our wonderful, brilliant, creative, fabulous, all good things, Sonia Perez. Who just makes this happen, and she makes the Faculty Center look good every single day. And it can't happen without her. So she cannot go anywhere ever. And you all know this and love her, and she's amazing at what she does. And she makes paper mache hands. Who knew? She didn't know that was in the job description. So, before we invite Sharon up, I would like to welcome my dear friend, Maureen Fitzpatrick, to help us introduce our very dear friend, and I am not getting choked up. I am not going to cry. Our very dear friend, Sharon, and I'm just so excited to have her share her research and to get to share this introduction with Maureen. Okay, so Sharon and I connected the very first day that we met when I interviewed here. We had dessert at our dinner. I knew I would like her, and Wes, I have to say, Wes was also part of that. And then when she drove me back to the hotel, I knew we would be friends, and I really hoped I got the job, and I was very happy when Heike called and said I did. So over the years, I've had the pleasure of working with Sharon on many research projects. We've team taught multiple times, been on countless search committees, one which involved a lot of eating Halloween candy, and us getting rather hysterical to the point where we had to actually mute, the three of us, had to mute the phone. I shouldn't say that in front of the provost. It was not ideal conditions. I don't remember who we were hiring for that one, but it wasn't one of you two, I promise. So I've also, over the years, gotten to know Sharon's family very well, and I said to welcome Sean and her three wonderful boys that my little kids always called the big boys. Oh, are those the big boys? They are all very big. Laura, tall, 6'8". So Sharon Hamill is one of the smartest, most dedicated, hardworking people I have ever met, but she also knows how to have fun, cares deeply about her family, and is a true friend. And that's it, and I'm not going to get choked up. We're not doing it. And we cry really easily.
Well, interestingly enough, I met Sharon when we were both students at UCI. But what's interesting is she was a graduate TA and I was an undergraduate. So kind of reversal of roles here. So I've known her since 1986, which is 32 years, which is longer than some of you have been living. And she was, as I said, a graduate TA and in one of my classes, and I looked up to her, both literally and figuratively, because of her helpfulness and kindness and intelligence. She was just, even back then, she was, I'm not going to get choked up either.
We're bad. Okay, so now this is the easier part we won't get choked up about. Sharon received her bachelor's degree from Cal State Long Beach. She was a first-generation college student and received her PhD from UC Irvine. She joined the psychology department at CSUSM in 1996 after having already earned tenure at another place and coming here. So we were very fortunate that we got her. She's been the psychology department chair, she's been the CHAD program director, and she's currently the faculty director for the CSU Institute for Palliative Care at CSUSM. Her work is widely respected across campus. I know I don't need to tell any of you that, and also across the country. She has been recognized as the Brakebill Outstanding Professor in 2016. She received the CSUSM Outstanding Service Leadership Award in 2013, and she's a member of the WASC Assessment Leadership Academy and a fellow of the Western Psychological Association. She regularly participates in WASC leadership teams across the country and is a very well-respected reviewer in those circles. She's published 22 scholarly journal articles, received close to 200,000 in grants, and presented close to 150 professional conference papers. Yes, we actually counted. And many of those have been, I think, most impressively with her undergraduate and graduate students. And she regularly mentors, I don't know how she does it, a very large lab of students and takes them to conferences and has them do posters. And one of her students is here today, so she can say, and I know she would agree, that her dedication to students is truly amazing and is really what we're about here. She exemplifies that perfectly.
So in addition to her dedication to her students, she provides exceptional service to the department, college, university, professional organizations, and the broader community. Actually, when Elisa and I were looking through her Vita to see what kind of service Sharon does, we both felt like slackers. Two examples of her outstanding service at the university include the establishment of the CHAD program, that's Child and Adolescent Development, in case you don't know, and as the faculty director of the Institute for Palliative Care. During the 10 years it took Sharon and I to develop the CHAD program, we hit many roadblocks and had to overcome many challenges. Sharon was instrumental in developing the rigorous curriculum that is now part of this program. And in the early stages, we were told by various entities on campus, after 3 years, you might have 80 or 90 majors. But Sharon, being the realist that she was, she said, I don't think so. This program's going to grow quickly, and she was right. So now in our third year, we don't have 80 or 90, we have over 350 majors. The success of the CHAD program is largely due to Sharon's foresight, hard work, leadership, and dedication. She's currently serving as the faculty director for the Institute of Palliative Care, and in that role, one of her major initiatives has been the campaign called What Gives Your Life Meaning. In getting all of us to talk about issues of death and the end of life care, she's really getting us to talk about life and the important things in our life, which then makes it become easier to talk about end of life. Once people realize their lives are meaningful, it becomes much easier to deal with end of life issues. Her recent research focuses on young people acting as caregivers and the effects on them. She has many interesting stories about conducting research with high school students. Maybe she'll share some of those today. So before we turn the podium over to Sharon, we'd like to just add that Many people can build an impressive resume. Sharon not only has done that, but she's also managed with her wonderful husband, Sean, to raise 3 terrific sons, be active in her faith community, and be a loving and supportive friend and colleague to many people. We welcome our dear friend, Sharon.
So now you made it really difficult to get. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for coming out for Taco Tuesday. I need to give you a little bit of background why Mexican food. I grew up with Mexican food, the Irish person that I am. My family, we lived in Los Angeles for a period of time when I was young, and it was a largely Hispanic neighborhood, and so I grew up eating homemade tortillas out on the curb after school every day. Mrs. Montano would make homemade flour tortillas, and we would all sit out there and eat those. And to this day, I still put ketchup on my tamales because you can't take the Irish out of this. The other thing you might say, why ice cream sundaes, aside from the fact that they're cool. When I was a kid, I'm one of 9 children, and the most important day of the year was your birthday. And you got to wear the birthday hat, and you got to be special, and the cake was okay, but it was the ice cream sundae that really made it. And I'm looking at Sean, and he remembers many times coming over where you'd get the whipped cream and the cherry and all of this. And so it really warms my heart that we got to have tacos and ice cream today. So thank you so much. Thank you to Sohaila. See how I'm so used to saying that. My dear friend Sohaila, who's here, Maddie, my grad student and key person in the Institute for Palliative Care at Cal State San Marcos, and some very dear friends of mine, Dr. Patricia East and her husband, Bill Ganellan. Tricia was a postdoc at UCI when I was a pre-doc, and this was, we figured out 32 years ago. 34 years ago. And when Tricia came there, I remember looking at her and thinking, I'm just so excited I get to work with her. And what's been really cool is that we've had a lifetime of a friendship. I so respect the work that she does, both with in terms of looking at pregnant teens, but also Somali refugees. I'm particularly appreciative of that because she's teaching my class tomorrow morning at 7:30. No, she's there at 9. So thank you, and I just really appreciate everybody coming out for this, and so I'm very excited to tell you a little bit about this. Those of you who've heard me speak before know that I kind of come at things from a little bit from left field, and more from left field because this isn't working. Oh wait, is it on? See, this is, there we go. Wait a minute. I should need you in class. That's why she's the program director for CHAD now. So, of course, I have to talk about Park and Fly because I'm doing a lot of traveling right now, and it's amazing the things you learn on Park and Fly. When you come back and you're tired, and about a year ago, I was coming back from Sacramento, and I had been at a palliative care conference, and I'm sitting in the Park and Fly van and listening to the driver and the people in the van talk. And this one woman is telling me that she left Sacramento. She was up there protesting. And he says, well, what are you protesting about? And she says, do you know that the state of California is trying to take away parental rights? Well, I was ready to get riled because, wait a minute, somebody needs to tell me, what the heck is going on. So they were talking about this bill, SB 18. And I thought, I am going to go look that up because, gosh darn it, I've got 3 kids. Yeah, they're old and they're grown and they're big, but still, I don't want anybody telling me how I'm going to, keep them in line. So I went and I looked up the bill, and this is what it said. This bill at the time was, and it has not been passed into law. It was based in part on the bill, UN's Bill of Rights for the Child, in which the United States has not ratified, and we are the only 195 countries have ratified it. And when I'm looking at this, the first thing I thought is, how in the world does anybody protest against this? I mean, what is going on here? And then I learned about guys like Rob Johnson, who was willing to go out there and protest because he did not want the government telling him what to do with his 4-year-old child. And I really had a hard time wrapping my head around this. How could anybody feel this way? And I started to think about it, and I thought, well, really it has to do with the way we think about family. Family is such a nice F word. It's just, you know, and especially when you come from one like mine that is crazy with the 9 kids and the 2 parents and then the crazy 3 that we had together. And all of you have families and they're all different and they look in a lot of different ways. And so I start thinking about that. And of course, I always have to think about the one I came from. Those were the Farrah Fawcett hairdo days. I was trying to rock the wings. But it always ended up being tubes. It just never worked. So then I think of the family that I had with my husband, Sean. And then I think about other families. Now this, I've actually shown this in another place before, these photos. And it's really interesting to me to see the divide between faculty in terms of age. So for the youngins out there, who is this? Who is this family? Come on. It's Beaver Cleaver. Did you guys know that? Okay. Okay, so who's this? The Bradys. Okay, we've got the Bradys. Okay, that one's a little political right now. For the youngins, who is it? The Addams family. No, the Munsters family, not the Addams family. But people used to confuse them a lot, actually. Look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see. You probably know this family, or this family. We all have different kinds of families, and hopefully nobody's got this family. So when we think about what family means, we all have different ideas about where this is coming from. When we think about childhood, we have ideas about what that means. Such a nice word, too. And when we think about it, we think of skipping and picket fences and unicorns and puppies and rainbows. And that's exactly, and so when I'm thinking back to why anybody would protest this bill, if it was in fact the way families were, then of course, sure we should protest that. But is that really an accurate description of what families are like? And as it turns out, it really isn't. I've been amazed and appalled by some of the things that I've seen with the families and the kids that I've worked with. As I'm looking at my colleagues in education in particular, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we have in our country, at last count, 1.4 million kids under the age of 18 serving as caregivers to family members because of mental or physical illnesses or substance abuse. That study was done in 2005, and they have not been able to generate enough research funds to pay for a more up-to-date study. We know that 5.8 million kids are living in households that are multi-generational households. For 2.9 million of them, their grandparents are their primary caregivers. We know that 2.5 million children experience the death of a parent. We know that 8.3 million children in the United States have a parent who is abusing substances. And we know that 1 out of 5 adults in the United States suffers from a mental illness at some point. That's the reality for many of kids in the United States. Some of you might say, well, what are those numbers? There are 74 million children in the US. So that's a significant portion of the children. And those are the ones that we've been able to count. When we look at family caregiving, we are far more likely to pay attention to what's going on with adults. We know in our country we have almost 44 million adult caregivers, and they represent 30 billion hours of care, $470 billion a year. That's the value for the care that these people provide to family members. Many of us in this audience are family caregivers right now or have been. And if you haven't been or you're not currently, chances are you will be. When we look at kids, however, they're hidden in plain sight. We say the 1.4 million that we've counted as family caregivers, not all those other kids I was just talking about, just the 1.4, we value their care at $8.5 billion per year. And that is, if we had to go out and pay for it, that's what it would be worth. But we don't even know they're there. And that creates a huge problem for the kids, the families, the teachers, and our society. Because what goes on during that time for these kids not only affects them today, but it affects them for the rest of their lives. Some of you may have heard of the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences study that was done by Folletti at Kaiser, actually, in San Diego. And they looked at 10 adverse life experiences that adults experienced and then linked it to physical health problems, mental health problems, and early death. And interestingly, family caregiving and bereavement were not two of the factors they even considered. So we have kids in situations where they're providing care to individuals like adults, and they're doing it without the benefit of support by and large. In the work that I've been doing out at local high schools, we come across kids. I'm actually sitting in on workshops every Friday that are being run by peer counselors and listening to the problems that the kids are dealing with. The substance abuse is just, it's almost a given for the kids walking through the door. But when you hear things like 17-year-old Mark, it has been in 3 different high schools in 3 years, in part because he is the primary caregiver for his father who has ALS. And he is busy navigating, working with a hospice, and trying to figure out how to qualify for Social Security benefits while he's going to school. And by the way, he's not he's causing some problems. And of course he is, because he's in a situation that most adults would find incredibly difficult to deal with. When we look at this is from this caregiver study that was done, we found 72% of the kids were providing care to a parent or grandparent. So they're providing care to adults. They also provide care to dependent siblings. Many kids are put in the position where they're helping out with brothers and sisters with autism or Downs or any number of physical or mental health problems. And the parents are asking for the kids to help because they need it. When we say, well, how old are these kids? We have here the breakdown from this report. And what's interesting about this, you might say, gosh, at age 8. That's only because they started counting at age 8. We know from work that's done around the world, in particular in the United Kingdom, kids under the age of 8 are providing care because, quite frankly, when you need the help, you take who's available. And that may be a 5-year-old. And that child does learn how to provide that kind of assistance. Males and females, and this is true, this is repeated in the research we're doing here, we often find that there's no gender difference. There is for adults, interestingly enough. When you look at adult caregivers, you find more women providing more intimate types of care, and men are creeping up there, and they're providing more and more care. They often do things like finances and less intimate forms of care. But when you look at kids, we see most of the time no gender is stepping up more than another. And I think it's just you take whosever hands are available, and you don't really care whether it's a boy or a girl. So what are some of the things they're doing? You're saying, oh, okay, our kids would probably complain, Sean, about the housework and whatnot we had them do. So what exactly do these kids do? There are 2 different types of tasks that we focus on. Activities of daily living, which are considered those activities that you need to participate in order to be an independent adult. Toileting, bathing, feeding yourself, those are activities of daily living, very intimate kinds of activities. When we look at instrumental activities, those are things like housework, meal preparation, etc. So we say, what do these kids actually do if we're calling them caregivers? And so I'm giving you some data from 3 different studies. One are college students who were caregivers here from Cal State San Marcos. The middle group, there was a group of Alzheimer's caregivers aged 11 to 21. And high school students, some of the work that we do where we identify what high school students are out there providing care to an adult. And all of these are providing care to an adult, by the way. So when you look at this, you think, okay, household work, transportation, shopping, all right, meal preparation. Those are great things for anybody to learn how to do. The reason we consider these caregiving is they're probably doing it so the adults in their lives can be doing the more intimate forms of care. So that's part of the reason. The one that scares the living daylights out of me are the two down on the end. We have medication management by kids. Remember, high school students, freshmen through seniors, with high school students providing medication management and money management. And why? Because they need help. The grandparents or the parents need assistance, and you take the help you're going to get from the local workforce, which would be your kids. For those of you who think, all right, that's probably good for their character, at least that's what we always told our boys, right? And this is going to help you in life somehow. Let's look at what happens with activities of daily living. We see that these young people are also providing help with these more intimate forms of care. They're less likely, more often they're going to be doing the IADLs, but they're still doing the more intimate forms of care. One I don't have up here, this is a really interesting one, is they often are watchers, that they're asked to, watch grandma so she doesn't choke. Have you ever thought about that? You're supposed to watch a family member so they don't choke. And what are you supposed to do if they start choking? We often don't tell them. We just say, let me know if she starts choking. Think about the stress that creates for that young person. Sean's dad lived with us when our kids were 9, 6, and 2. And the boys all helped with caregiving. They were never left alone with their grandfather. But now that they're older and we ask them about it, Colin told us, our oldest told us one time, I was always worried that something was going to happen and I was going to have to know what to do. And I said, you were never alone with him. We always had a parent in the house. And he says, yeah, but I still worried about it. It still made me nervous. And this is something as a 28-year-old he still talks about. So what we know is that the kids are in there, providing this help. When you say, well, how many kids are actually doing this? In the report by the Young Caregivers Report, and typically in the research I've done across the 20 years I've been here, usually about 2/3 of caregiving families will report that their kids are giving hands-on help. And then families really differ on exactly what they ask them to do. Now, when you say, well, what kind of an impact does that have on the kids? There's a lot of different research that's being done. A lot of this is being done out of the United States because we're so far behind. But certainly there's work that's been done here at Cal State San Marcos. I'm looking at Devin and Kim, who were partners in crime with me at a large study of over 1,000 local high school students, where we looked at their drug and alcohol use. And looked at caregivers, and big surprise, the caregiving kids were using more drugs than alcohol. They were doing just what parents do, self-medicating. And we found differences in the kinds of drugs they were using depending on who they were taking care of. When they were taking care of a parent, they were more likely to be using prescription drugs not intended for them. And Maddie will remember, we kind of figured out that we think there's no smell if you're taking an opioid. They're not going to know that you took that, but they'd know if you smoked a joint or if you drank a beer. So we see the kids figuring out, how they can manage this stress, and they're sometimes not using very good methods. We do see academics are impacted, and I'm going to tell you in a minute about what happens at Cal State San Marcos with regard to that. Some of the work we're doing right now is looking at psychosocial development, and one of the really interesting things we're seeing is that some studies have said, wow, these kids seem older than their years. But we're actually looking at their psychosocial development and getting measures of their self-reliance and their social commitment, and finding, despite the fact that they look older, they're actually exhibiting lower levels of psychosocial maturity. And so this suggests that perhaps that caregiving has a cost to these kids. We also see, and this, I always like to see the positive stuff, because it's not all bad. Just like any of us who've been a caregiver, you know, there's those stressors, but there's also wonderful, rich things that happen that make you feel like, yeah, I'll get up for another day and do this. We do see evidence that there's some greater empathy. It's a great way to teach children and adolescents how to care for other people. Always important to me, I try to study, are they willing to care for their parents in the future, because I'm hedging my bets with my own kids. Please make sure that you take care of dad. They decided, we told them we would live with them, you know, each of them 4 months out of the year, and they're kind of afraid. When we look at them providing help to their grandparents, what we see is the relationships with grandparents, when that happens, they're more affectionate. Now, whether it's the care that leads to greater affection or they had greater affection to begin with, we don't know. It's probably a little bit of both. But we do see also they were more likely to provide help when the parents were reporting more burdens. So that suggests to us they're helping because they have to. The parents need it. The good news is, as we've started to look at some social support issues, that social support for caregiving ends up being an important thing. That if the kids are out there doing it on their own, we're seeing these negative outcomes. But with some support, with some acknowledgement, we can actually see them rise and join, you know, perhaps adults that are finding meaning in providing care to somebody else. It is not a terrible role to have. What's terrible is that we don't acknowledge what they're doing, and they're left to do this on their own. And they don't even tell their friends about it, in part because caregiving kids are more likely to be bullied by others. They're actually more likely to bully, too. But they've got tremendous stresses at school, at home, and nobody's paying any attention to what's going on. Cal State San Marcos, we did a 4-year study, the STAR study, looking at academic achievement. We actually got permission from the students to use their actual grades and looked at if they dropped out and when they dropped out. So even students who left this study, we were able to follow their academics over 4 years. And so what we found, that we call them emerging adult caregivers. If you're 18 to, I'm looking at the developmentalists back there. Yeah, emerging adult caregivers, that's who we have here. And what we find, interestingly, that with regard to academics, they were no more likely to drop out than non-caregivers, which was a surprise. And there was no difference in their GPA. And so we thought, wow, they're hanging in there. But what we did find, they had greater stress, greater depression, and lower self-esteem than their non-caregiving peers. So they're hanging in there academically, but they're doing it at great personal, emotional cost. I looked a little deeper in caregiving, just looked at the caregiving college students to say, okay, how about just those caregivers do we see a difference in dropping out? And we did actually see that those caregivers who were reporting higher levels of obligation to their families were more likely to drop out before the sophomore year of high school or of college. So the academics aren't the straightforward what you thought it would be, but what it suggests to us is, and you all know this if you're teaching, how many of us have had somebody come and say somebody's died or somebody's ill and I'm struggling, but I need to stay in here and get finished and I'm going to do everything I can. It happens every semester, every class. There's somebody in there that's dealing with this. What I will tell you is when we don't recognize the role that they play, the very important role they play in their families, we also don't recognize that when they lose the role, when somebody dies, they suffer there too. And all of this suffering is going on in the background with no adults, no formal recognition in this country about what it is that they're doing or the great role that they're playing in their families. So I've got to have a pitch for what we need to do for these young caregivers. Certainly, I need to tell you, there are no policies in the United States that address young caregivers. As a matter of fact, there are services for caregivers. We have some fabulous services in San Diego, but you have to be 18 years old to qualify for them. So there is one place in the United States. It's in Boca Raton, Florida. It is the American Association of Caregiving Youth, run by Connie Siskowski, who is an RN in Boca Raton, who actually spends her time fundraising to pay for 6 social workers to work with caregiving youth in Boca Raton. And every year she's out there trying to get enough social workers to help address this issue for those kids. I argue that palliative care, taking a palliative approach, palliative care includes support for family caregiving, that this may be one way that we can address some of the issues that these kids have. I also believe that the kids end up being great educators for their families to let them know, hey, there are these services out there. Why would this be important? Because if you can control symptoms, if you can have patients who are suffering, have better, higher quality of life, the family also has a higher quality of life. And any of us who've experienced a family member who's ill know that your mood, your happiness is really highly dependent on how well they're doing. And so by addressing this from a palliative perspective, we're able to offer more support to the kids. We also are running a youth resiliency project in some of the local high schools. As a matter of fact, next week, thank you to Erica Daniels. She has her Alliance Counselor Forum. While the counselors are over at the USU, the peer counselors from those high schools will be here learning about resiliency skills. We believe that there is never going to be enough money to pay for all the mental health professionals that we need. So we are taking the approach that what if we trained the peer counselors, we trained the kids to be more compassionate, to know, have some skills in terms of mindfulness. I'm looking at the mindfulness table over there. Some mindfulness skills, some expressive arts. We were talking about music, ways to teach kids more adaptive ways to deal with the stress that they're having, and teach them problem-solving skills, how to obtain the resources that they and their families need. I am so incredibly excited about this. This is the Youth Caregivers website. I currently am teaching a class in risk and resiliency with 40 CHAD majors. Their assignment was to create content for the website that young caregivers and bereaved youth could use to help navigate the experiences they're having at home. And so this will be launching at the end of this semester, and I'm so proud of them. We all know the students do a much better job than we do coming up with things, and it's amazing what they've been able to do. This is the K through 12 teacher counselor toolkit we developed. My husband is a teacher for close to 30 years, and he, as we talked about this, he gave a lot of feedback. And he'd say, keep it short, don't make it academic, make it useful. They need to be able to use it on a prep period, right, teachers over there? Please don't make it so they have to. So what we did is we created a manual that not only, it has a chapter on grief in which there are charts in there. So if the student is a Latina Jehovah Witness, the teacher can look up the different kinds of traditions that those groups have and be able to better respond to what the teen is bringing, or elementary school kid is bringing into the classroom. There's a chapter on young caregivers, helping them to identify what do these kids look like and what can you do to help them. There's a chapter on palliative care and health. Why? Because as teachers, how many times have you had a student come in and say something like, well, my loved one had an ischemic stroke, and you're saying, what is that? Or dementia. Right now, the End of Life Option Act passed in June of 2016, which makes it legal for terminally ill patients to take their own lives. School counselors and teachers are going to be hearing from kids to say, hey, Grandpa killed himself over the weekend. It's not considered suicide. How is that teacher or counselor supposed to respond to this? So there's information in this manual that makes it so they can respond from an educated standpoint. There's also a chapter on self-compassion, self-care, and many, many resources, because we figure those teachers are doing an incredible job. They take a beating out there in the public. We need, as a university, to be doing what we can to support the first responders that are in the classroom. And so that's why we created that. Of course, you knew What Gives Your Life Meaning was going to come up here. I really think if we adopted a more compassionate, proactive approach to having conversations like this, even at the elementary school level, and grew developmentally with the kids, we might be able to reach some of those kids that end up being disenfranchised or worse, creating such havoc in our schools because they never connected with someone and they so desperately needed some help. So this is a picture from our trip when we were in England. I went to see Dr. Saul Becker among a couple of other people. Saul was responsible for getting legislation passed in the UK that makes it a requirement for the accreditation of schools that they have to serve young caregivers. They have to identify them, and they have to have support services. In the UK, there are 350 centers for family caregivers. I visited some in rural areas in London, talked with people who wrote policy for this. It was amazing. They're 30 years ahead of us. We have one center for 74 million kids in the United States. And having the opportunity to go there, this is a shout out for the administrators here, and in particular, I just saw there's a faculty centers having a thing on writing your proposal for your sabbaticals. Thursday. We are so fortunate that the support that I got on sabbatical enabled me to go and talk with people that have done this, have been successful, to get ideas and bring them back to the U.S. I so appreciate not just the administrators, certainly, but also the faculty who serve on those committees that help us to do the kind of work we do. So there's a shout out for that. It really does make a difference. You take what you learn and you bring it back here and you use it. I will leave you with this last thought, that when I returned from England, I had an email from Connie Siskowski, who runs, we work on some things together, and she sent me an email and she said, Sharon, it's so weird, while you were gone, I heard from someone in San Diego, and this young man, both of his parents are ill. And he got on the internet and he searched and he asked his grandma to contact Connie to say, do you have anything that you can offer me? This kid was 7 years, that's not him, but he was 7 years old. I don't think kids should have to get on the internet and find something 3,000 miles away to help them deal with an issue that is really so common. So when I say, is anybody out there, can anybody hear me? That's what I hear from the kids. And I'd like to tell them, yeah, we're listening, because we've got a lot of students, and I'm looking at one right now, who get out there in the schools with me to make sure that these kids are heard. And so I salute you, Maddie, and the other students that are out there helping us to make this change. So hug a kid out there. They need it. Thank you so much for your attention.